On the afternoon of March 14, 1962, Harold Eugene Brennan adjusted his oversized polka-dot bow tie in the rearview mirror of his 1957 Chevrolet station wagon and checked the address scribbled on the crumpled paper beside him. The house on Maple Drive in Arlington, Virginia, looked like every other house on the tree-lined street, with its neat lawn, white picket fence, and the cheerful yellow balloons tied to the mailbox. Harold had no reason to suspect that within the next 2 hours, his career as Pickles the Party Clown would intersect with one of the most sensitive counterintelligence operations in American history. The birthday party he was about to perform at would seem utterly ordinary, until the moment he reached into his prop bag for his juggling pins and accidentally pulled out something that had no business being there. But before we dive into this story, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so we can bring you the most gripping Cold War and espionage stories every day. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support us. Harold Brennan was 43 years old, a Korean War veteran who had returned home with shrapnel scars on his left leg and a determination to never take life too seriously again. He had started his clown business in 1956, performing at birthday parties, company picnics, and community events throughout the greater Washington area. His wife, Martha, often joked that he had found the perfect profession for someone who had seen too much darkness and needed to surround himself with children's laughter. What Martha did not know was that Harold sometimes had nightmares about the frozen hills of Korea, and that the sound of a child's giggle was the only thing that could pull him back from those memories. The Brennan family lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Falls Church, just 8 miles from the nation's capital. Harold stored his clown equipment in a rented storage unit on the outskirts of town, a cramped space that smelled perpetually of mothballs and old rubber. Every morning, he would drive there to collect his props for the day's performances. His routine was always the same: arrive at 7 in the morning, unlock the padlock, pull the chain to turn on the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, and methodically load his station wagon with the collapsible table, the prop bag, the balloon pump, and the battered suitcase containing his costume and makeup. On that particular Thursday morning, Harold had noticed something odd. The padlock on his storage unit had seemed slightly loose, as if someone had picked it and then hastily replaced it. He had dismissed the thought almost immediately. Who would break into a storage unit full of clown props? The neighborhood was not particularly crime-ridden, and there was nothing valuable inside except for some old magic tricks and a few pounds of balloon materials. Still, the unease had lingered as he loaded his equipment. The party was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the afternoon at the residence of Dr. Raymond Fisher, a physicist who worked for a government contractor Harold had never heard of. The invitation had come through the usual channels: a phone call from Mrs. Fisher requesting a 1-hour performance for her son's 9th birthday. 16 children would be attending, she had explained in her slight accent that Harold could not quite place. Eastern European, perhaps, though he was no expert. She wanted balloon animals, magic tricks, and juggling. Nothing elaborate. Just enough entertainment to keep the children occupied while the parents socialized in the backyard. Harold pulled up to the Fisher residence at 2:45, giving himself 15 minutes to set up. The house was larger than most on the street, a 2-story colonial with dark green shutters and a meticulously maintained garden. As he gathered his equipment from the back of the station wagon, he noticed a black sedan parked 3 houses down. 2 men sat inside, both wearing dark suits and sunglasses despite the overcast weather. Harold felt that old military instinct kick in, the awareness of being watched. He shook it off. This was Arlington, Virginia, less than 5 miles from the Pentagon. Half the residents probably worked for some government agency or another. Men in dark suits were as common here as maple trees. Mrs. Elizabeth Fisher answered the door before Harold could knock. She was a striking woman in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that seemed to assess him with unusual intensity. Harold noticed she wore no jewelry except for a simple wedding band. Her smile was polite, but did not quite reach her eyes. "Welcome, Mr. Brennan," she said, her accent more pronounced in person. "The children are in the backyard. You can set up on the patio. My husband will join us shortly. He is finishing some work in his study." Harold followed her through a house that was remarkably sparse for a family with a young child. The furniture looked expensive, but impersonal, as if selected from a catalogue rather than accumulated over years of marriage. There were no family photographs on the walls, no cluttered side tables with mail and magazines. Everything was orderly to the point of sterility. The only personal touch Harold noticed was a Russian nesting doll on the mantelpiece. Its bright painted colours, a stark contrast to the muted beige and cream tones of the room. The backyard was more welcoming, with 16 children already racing around the lawn, while several parents stood in clusters, holding paper cups of punch. Harold recognized a few faces from previous parties. The Washington suburbs were not that large, and the circle of government families who hired entertainment for their children's parties was even smaller. He waved to Mrs. Patterson, whose daughter's birthday he had performed at last summer, and received a tight smile in return. Something felt off about the gathering, though Harold could not articulate what. He set up his collapsible table near the patio and began arranging his props. The children quickly gathered around, their excited chatter filling the air. Harold slipped into his performance mode, the transformation as natural as breathing. He became Pickles the Clown, with exaggerated gestures and a voice pitched slightly higher than his normal tone. The children laughed as he fumbled with his oversized shoes, a bit of slapstick that never failed to get a reaction. The first 30 minutes of the performance went smoothly. Harold made balloon animals, twisted into the shapes of dogs and giraffes and swords. He performed card tricks that had the children gasping with amazement. He told jokes that were corny enough to make the adults groan while the kids howled with laughter. All the while, he noticed Dr. Fisher had not yet made an appearance. Mrs. Fisher stood at the edge of the patio, watching not the performance but the street beyond, as if expecting someone. It was during the juggling portion of his act that everything changed. Harold reached into his prop bag for his juggling pins, 3 brightly colored wooden clubs that he had been using for years. His hand touched something unfamiliar, something smooth and rectangular wrapped in cloth. He frowned, his fingers exploring the object. It felt like a small book, roughly 5 inches by 7 inches, bound in what seemed to be leather. Harold's heart began to pound. This was not his. Someone had placed this in his prop bag. His mind raced back to the loose padlock, to the black sedan with the 2 men in suits, to the strange atmosphere of this party. His military training kicked in, the old instincts from Korea when knowing the difference between a civilian and a threat could mean the difference between life and death. He pulled out the juggling pins with his other hand, continuing his act without missing a beat. But his mind was no longer on the performance. The children's laughter seemed distant, muffled. He juggled mechanically, his thoughts focused on the mysterious object in his bag. What was it? Why was it in his equipment? And more importantly, who had put it there? As he finished the juggling routine, Harold noticed Dr. Fisher finally emerge from the house. He was a thin man in his early 40s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time indoors. He wore a cardigan, despite the mild weather, and carried himself with the slight stoop of a scholar. But it was his eyes that caught Harold's attention. They swept the backyard with the same assessing intensity as his wife's, lingering on each adult guest before finally settling on Harold himself. The final portion of Harold's act involved simple magic tricks with handkerchiefs and disappearing coins. He performed them automatically, his body going through motions perfected over 6 years, while his mind remained fixed on the object in his bag. Should he look at it? Should he report it? To whom? The local police? The thought seemed absurd. What would he say? He found a book in his clown bag. As the performance concluded and the children applauded, Harold began packing up his equipment with deliberate slowness. He needed time to think. Mrs. Fisher approached with an envelope containing his payment, her smile still not quite genuine. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan," she said. "The children enjoyed your performance very much. You were highly recommended." Harold accepted the envelope, his mind catching on that last phrase. Recommended by whom? He had not asked during their initial phone conversation, assuming she had gotten his name from a satisfied customer or a local advertisement. Now the question seemed crucial. "I am glad they had fun," Harold replied, keeping his voice light. "May I ask who recommended my services?" Something flickered in Mrs. Fisher's eyes. Gone so quickly Harold might have imagined it. "Oh, I believe it was Mrs. Patterson," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the woman Harold had recognized earlier. "She spoke very highly of your work." Harold glanced at Mrs. Patterson, who was now shepherding her children toward the gate. He remembered her daughter's party clearly. It had been a disaster. The birthday girl had cried through most of his performance, upset that he was not the magician she had wanted. Mrs. Patterson had been openly hostile, complaining about his fee and refusing to tip. There was no chance she had recommended him to anyone. "That was very kind of her," Harold said, maintaining his smile while his pulse quickened. He finished packing his equipment, acutely aware of the mysterious object still hidden in his prop bag. As he carried his belongings toward the side gate, Dr. Fisher stepped into his path. "Mr. Brennan," the physicist said, his voice soft with that same indeterminate accent as his wife, "I wonder if I might have a word with you. In private." Harold's military training had taught him to recognize danger, and every instinct now screamed that he was in it. But he also knew that showing fear would be the worst possible response. He set down his equipment and followed Dr. Fisher to a corner of the yard, away from the remaining guests. "I understand you rent a storage unit near Route 7, Dr. Fisher said without preamble. Unit 42, if I am not mistaken." The blood drained from Harold's face. How did this man know where he stored his equipment? Harold had never mentioned it to any client. The unit was rented under his name, but the address was not listed in any advertisement or business card. "I do not mean to alarm you," Dr. Fisher continued, his eyes never leaving Harold's face, "but I believe someone has been using your storage unit for purposes you are unaware of. The object in your bag, you have found it, yes?" Harold's throat felt dry. He managed a slight nod. "Good," Dr. Fisher said. "Then you need to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because both our lives may depend on it." Over the next 10 minutes, standing in the corner of a suburban backyard, while children ate birthday cake and parents made small talk, Harold Brennan learned that the world he thought he understood was far more complex and dangerous than he had imagined. Dr. Raymond Fisher was not merely a physicist working for a government contractor. He was a defector, a Soviet scientist who had fled to the United States 18 months earlier, with knowledge of his country's nuclear weapons program. The Central Intelligence Agency had relocated him to Arlington under a new identity, providing him with a cover story and a carefully constructed life designed to hide him from Soviet agents who wanted him dead or recaptured. But the Soviets had found him. They always did, Dr. Fisher explained with a weariness that suggested this was not the first time he had been discovered. 3 weeks ago, his handler at the agency had warned him that they had intercepted communications suggesting a Soviet intelligence cell was operating in the Washington area. The cell was believed to be planning either an assassination or an abduction. Dr. Fisher and his family were supposed to be moved to a new location. But before the relocation could be arranged, the handler had disappeared. That was when Dr. Fisher decided to take matters into his own hands. He could not trust the official channels, not when his handler's disappearance suggested the Soviets had penetrated the very organization meant to protect him. So he began his own investigation, watching for signs of surveillance, trying to identify who among his neighbors and acquaintances might be working for Soviet intelligence. And then he found it. A network, not of professional spies, but of ordinary Americans who had been recruited or coerced into helping the Soviet cause. They passed messages, provided safe houses, and helped smuggle materials in and out of the country. The network was clever, using civilians whose jobs gave them access to different parts of the city without suspicion. Delivery drivers, maintenance workers, and yes, children's entertainers who traveled to dozens of homes each week with equipment that was rarely inspected. "Your storage unit," Dr. Fisher said, his voice urgent, "has been compromised. Someone in the network gained access to it. They have been using it as a dead drop, a place to leave materials that another agent picks up later. The object in your bag is a code book, a key to encrypted Soviet communications. It was meant to be picked up today by someone at this party." Harold felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. A Soviet spy at a child's birthday party. The idea seemed insane, like something from a pulp thriller rather than real life. But Dr. Fisher's intensity left no room for doubt. "Who?" Harold asked. "Which one of them?" "I do not know," Dr. Fisher admitted. That is why I arranged this party. To gather the suspects in one place. The network knows I am here, knows my real identity. They have been watching me, trying to determine what I know and who I have told, but they do not know that I have been watching them too. The code book was bait. Whoever tries to retrieve it from you will expose themselves. This is insane, Harold said, his voice barely above a whisper. Why did you not go to the police, the FBI? Because I do not know who has been compromised, Dr. Fisher replied. My handler's disappearance proves that. The Soviets have people inside our intelligence services. If I go to the wrong person, I am dead, and so is my family. But you, Mr. Brennan, you are a civilian. You have no connections to the intelligence community. You are, in a way, the safest person I could approach. Harold's mind reeled. He thought of Martha, of their quiet life. To have the simple pleasure he took in making children laugh. He had left the violence of war behind in Korea, or so he thought. Now it had found him again, dressed in a suburban disguise. What do you want me to do? He asked. Dr. Fisher glanced back at the party. The guests were beginning to leave, parents collecting their children and saying their goodbyes. Go home, he said. Do not look at the code book. Do not tell anyone about this conversation. Tomorrow morning, go to your storage unit as usual. There will be a man there, someone from the network. He will try to retrieve the code book. Take his photograph if you can, get his license plate, anything that can help identify him. Then bring that information to me. And if he tries to take it by force, Harold asked. Then run, Dr. Fisher said simply. These people are not playing games, Mr. Brennan. They will kill to protect their operation. Harold picked up his equipment with hands that had begun to shake slightly. The prop bag felt heavier now, laden with more than just colorful toys and tricks. He carried the secrets of nations, wrapped in cloth and hidden among balloon animals and juggling pins. As he walked toward the gate, Mrs. Patterson stepped into his path. Leaving so soon, Mr. Brennan? She asked. Her smile was bright, but her eyes were calculating. Just need to get to my next appointment, Harold replied, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. Thank you for the recommendation, by the way. Mrs. Fisher mentioned you suggested my services. Mrs. Patterson's smile froze for just a fraction of a second, so briefly that someone not watching for it would have missed it entirely. Did she? The woman said. How kind of her to say so, though I confess I do not remember our conversation about entertainers. I have been so scattered lately. Harold nodded and moved past her, his heart pounding. She was lying. She had not recommended him, which meant someone else had. Someone who needed Harold at this party for reasons that had nothing to do with entertaining children. He glanced back once as he loaded his station wagon. Dr. Fisher stood on the patio, talking with his wife. They looked like any other suburban couple at their child's birthday party, but Harold now saw the tension in their postures, the way their eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. The drive back to his apartment felt longer than usual. Every car behind him seemed suspicious. Every turn he made might be followed. Harold found himself checking his rearview mirror constantly, looking for the black sedan with the two men in suits. He did not see it, but that somehow made him more nervous. Where were they? Had they been watching the whole time? Did they know about the code book? Martha was in the kitchen when he arrived home, preparing dinner and humming along to the radio. The normalcy of the scene was jarring. She looked up as he entered, her smile fading as she saw his face. Harold, what is wrong? She asked. You look like you have seen a ghost. He almost told her everything. The words were on his tongue, the desperate need to share this burden with someone he trusted. But then he remembered Dr. Fisher's warning. The Soviets had people inside the intelligence services. They had compromised his storage unit. How far did their network reach? Could they be listening somehow? Could telling Martha put her in danger? Just a long day, he said, kissing her cheek. The party was more exhausting than usual. Lots of kids, very energetic. Martha studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. Well, go wash up. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. Harold went to their bedroom and closed the door. He set the prop bag on the bed and stared at it. The code book was in there, hidden among his innocent props. He should look at it, should see what was so important that the Soviets would compromise an entertainer's storage unit to pass it along. But Dr. Fisher had told him not to. Why? What would happen if he looked? His hands were on the bag before he fully realized what he was doing. He reached inside, past the deflated balloons and the tangle of silk handkerchiefs, until his fingers closed around the cloth-wrapped object. He pulled it out slowly, carefully, as if it might explode. The cloth was simple black cotton tied with a thin cord. Harold untied it with trembling fingers. Inside was indeed a book, or rather a notebook with a plain leather cover. He opened it to the first page and immediately regretted his decision. The text was in Russian, densely written in tiny script that filled every line of every page, but interspersed among the Cyrillic characters were numbers, long strings of digits that Harold recognized from his military service as coordinates, latitude and longitude, locations. And next to many of these coordinates were dates, all within the past 6 months. Harold's blood ran cold as he realized what he was looking at. This was not just a codebook for encrypted communications. This was a log, a record of operations. The coordinates likely marked dead drops, meeting points, safe houses. The dates indicated when exchanges had occurred. This notebook contained enough information to roll up an entire spy network, and he had it. A children's party clown had stumbled into possession of what might be one of the most valuable intelligence documents of the Cold War. Someone knocked on the bedroom door, and Harold nearly jumped out of his skin. He quickly wrapped the notebook back in its cloth and shoved it under the mattress. "Harold," Martha called, "dinner is ready." "Coming," he managed to reply, his voice sounding strained even to his own ears. Dinner was torture. Harold pushed food around his plate, unable to eat, while Martha talked about her day at the library where she worked part-time. She had checked out a new mystery novel, she said, something about a spy in London. The irony was almost too much to bear. Harold nodded and made appropriate noises, but heard nothing. His mind was miles away, thinking about the notebook under his mattress and the impossible situation he found himself in. That night, Harold barely slept. He lay beside Martha, listening to her peaceful breathing, while his own thoughts raced. Tomorrow he would go to the storage unit. Tomorrow someone would try to retrieve the codebook. Tomorrow he might come face to face with an actual Soviet agent. The thought was terrifying and surreal in equal measure. At 6 in the morning, Harold gave up on sleep. He rose quietly, dressed in the dark, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. As he waited for it to brew, he thought about his options. He could ignore Dr. Fisher's instructions and go straight to the FBI. But what if the physicist was right about the Soviets having people inside the Bureau? What if reporting this got Dr. Fisher and his family killed? He could throw the notebook away, pretend he had never found it. But that felt like a betrayal, not just of Dr. Fisher, but of his country. Harold had fought in Korea. He had seen what communism looked like up close. If he could help stop Soviet espionage in America, did he not have an obligation to try? Or he could do exactly what Dr. Fisher had asked. Go to the storage unit, identify the person who came for the codebook, and bring that information back. It seemed like the middle path, a way to help without getting in too deep. But Harold knew that was a fiction. He was already in too deep. The moment he had reached into his prop bag at that birthday party, his life had changed. He drank his coffee and made his decision. He would go to the storage unit. He would be careful. And if things got dangerous, he would run. Harold Brennan was many things, but he was not stupid. He had survived the frozen hell of Korea. He could survive this. At 7 o'clock, Harold left a note for Martha saying he had an early appointment and drove to the storage facility. The morning was overcast, with heavy clouds promising rain. The facility was a long single-story building divided into individual units, each with its own roll-up door and padlock. Harold's unit was near the end, number 42, exactly as Dr. Fisher had said. Harold parked his station wagon in his usual spot and sat for a moment watching. The facility was quiet. A few other vehicles were scattered in the parking area, but Harold saw no one. He checked his watch. 7:15. He had told Dr. Fisher he arrived at 7 every morning. If someone was watching his routine, they would know this was when the storage unit would be accessible. He got out of the car and walked to the unit, keys in hand. The padlock looked normal, no signs of tampering this morning, but as he bent to unlock it, Harold heard footsteps behind him. Mr. Brennan. Harold spun around. The man standing 10 feet away was in his 30s, with dark hair and an unremarkable face. He wore work clothes, jeans, and a flannel shirt and carried a toolbox. He looked like any one of 100 maintenance workers or contractors who might have legitimate business at a storage facility. "Can I help you?" Harold asked, keeping his voice steady. "I hope so," the man replied. His accent was flat, Midwestern maybe. "My name is Tom Mitchell. I am a private investigator, and I need to speak with you about Dr. Raymond Fisher." Harold's mind raced. Was this the Soviet agent, or was he actually an investigator? There was no way to know. "I do not know anyone by that name," Harold said carefully. The man, Tom Mitchell, smiled. It was not a friendly expression. "Come now, Mr. Brennan. You performed at his son's birthday party yesterday. You spoke with him privately for several minutes, and unless I am very much mistaken, he gave you something." "I was hired to entertain children," Harold replied. "I did not receive anything except my fee." Tom Mitchell took a step closer. Harold noticed the man's right hand had moved to his belt, resting just above his hip, where a holster might be hidden beneath the flannel shirt. "I think you did," Mitchell said. "I think Dr. Fisher passed you a notebook, a small leather-bound notebook with Russian text, and I need you to give it to me." This was it, the moment Dr. Fisher had warned him about. Harold's heart hammered in his chest, but his voice remained calm. "I do not have what you are talking about." Mitchell's hand moved slightly, confirming Harold's suspicion about the gun. "Mr. Brennan, this can go one of two ways, easy or hard. I would prefer easy. So would you, I think." Harold's military training kicked in. He was not armed, not even carrying a knife. Mitchell had at least one gun, probably more. Running was not an option, not with Mitchell between him and his car, which meant Harold needed to stall, needed to find an advantage. "If I had this notebook," Harold said, "why would I give it to you? How do I know you are who you say you are?" That seemed to surprise Mitchell. The man's hand relaxed slightly. "Fair question," he said. He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a badge and identification card. "Private investigator, licensed in Virginia and Maryland. My client is concerned about Dr. Fisher's activities. They believe he may be involved in espionage." "Who is your client?" Harold asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "That is confidential," Mitchell replied, "but they are willing to pay for information, quite generously. If you cooperate, Mr. Brennan, you could walk away from this with enough money to retire your clown business and never have to work another child's party again." So this was how they operated, not with threats, at least not immediately, but with money. The Soviets knew that most Americans could be bought if the price was right. Harold thought of his cramped apartment, of Martha's hours at the library, of the constant struggle to make ends meet. The temptation was real, but so was the memory of Korea, of watching good men die fighting against communism, of the cold certainty that some things mattered more than money. "I still do not have what you are looking for," Harold said, "and I think you should leave." Mitchell's expression hardened. His hand returned to his belt. "That is unfortunate," he said, "because now we have to do this the hard way." What happened next occurred in seconds but felt like an eternity. Mitchell reached for his gun, his hand moving with practiced speed. Harold grabbed the nearest object he could find, one of his juggling pins leaning against the storage unit door, and threw it as hard as he could. The wooden club struck Mitchell in the face, not hard enough to do serious damage but enough to make him stumble backward. Harold did not wait to see what happened next. He ran, not toward his car, which Mitchell could easily cut off, but toward the far end of the storage facility, where a chain-link fence separated the property from a wooded area. He heard Mitchell shout behind him, heard running footsteps, but did not look back. He reached the fence and jumped, his 43-year-old body protesting as he hauled himself up and over. The old shrapnel wound in his legs, screamed in pain, but adrenaline drove him forward. He hit the ground on the other side and kept running, plunging into the woods. Behind him, he heard Mitchell at the fence, heard the man cursing. But the footsteps did not follow. After a moment, Harold understood why. Mitchell would not chase him into the woods. That would be too risky, too likely to attract attention. Instead, he would fall back, regroup, try a different approach. Harold kept running anyway, deeper into the woods, until his lungs burned and his leg could take no more. He collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. His heart felt like it might burst from his chest. But he was alive. He had escaped. Now what? He could not go home. Mitchell knew who he was, knew where he lived. Martha would be in danger. He could not go to the police, not without knowing who to trust. That left only one option. He had to find Dr. Fisher. Harold waited in the woods for 20 minutes, catching his breath and watching to make sure Mitchell had not followed. Then he carefully made his way back toward the storage facility, approaching from a different angle. His station wagon was still in the parking lot. Mitchell was gone. But Harold noticed something that made his blood run cold. The padlock on his storage unit had been cut. The door was open. They had searched his unit, looking for the notebook, which meant they knew Harold did not have it on him, which meant they would search his apartment next. Harold ran to his car and drove like a madman toward his apartment complex. He arrived to find the door to his apartment slightly ajar. His worst fears were confirmed. They had been here too. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, his heart in his throat. "Martha!" he called. "Harold!" Her voice came from the bedroom, shaky and frightened. "Harold, what is happening?" He found her sitting on the bed, her face pale. 2 men had been here, she explained. They said they were federal agents, showed badges, said they needed to search the apartment for evidence related to a case. They had been polite but thorough, going through every room. They had left just 5 minutes ago. Harold felt sick. Federal agents, or men pretending to be federal agents. Either way, they had not found the notebook because Harold had taken it out from under the mattress at 6 in the morning and hidden it in the trunk of his car, wrapped in his spare tire. Some instinct had told him not to leave it in the apartment. Now that instinct might have saved both their lives. "We need to leave," Harold said. "Right now. Pack a bag, just essentials. We are going to a hotel for a few days." Martha started to argue, then saw the look on his face and simply nodded. While she packed, Harold went to the phone and called Dr. Fisher's number. A woman answered, "Not Mrs. Fisher." "This number has been disconnected," she said, in a flat, mechanical voice. "There is no new number." Harold's hands were shaking as he hung up. Dr. Fisher was gone, disappeared. Had he been moved by the CIA? Or had the Soviets gotten to him? There was no way to know, which meant Harold was on his own with a Soviet codebook in his trunk and killers looking for him. He took Martha to a motel on the outskirts of Fairfax, paid cash for 3 nights, and told the clerk his name was Robert Thompson. Once they were in the room with the door locked and chained, he finally told Martha everything about the birthday party, the codebook, Dr. Fisher, the man at the storage unit. All of it. Martha listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each revelation. When Harold finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. "We need to give it to someone," she finally said. "Someone we can trust." But who? Harold thought about his old commander from Korea, Colonel Jennings. The man had retired to Maryland, Harold knew, living on a small farm outside Baltimore. Jennings had been career military, a man of unwavering integrity. If anyone could be trusted to handle this properly, it was him. But first, Harold needed to know what he was dealing with. That night, after Martha had fallen into an exhausted sleep, Harold sat at the small motel desk, with the notebook open under the weak lamplight. He could not read Russian, but the coordinates and dates told their own story. Using a map of the Washington area he had bought at a gas station, Harold began plotting the locations. What he discovered chilled him to the bone. The coordinates marked locations throughout the capital region, government buildings, defense contractors, research facilities, and disturbingly several private residences in Arlington and Alexandria. One set of coordinates matched the address of Dr. Fisher's house. Another matched Harold's own storage facility. This was not just a code book. It was a complete map of a Soviet spy network operating in the heart of America's government. And the date suggested the network was still active, with the most recent entry just 3 days ago. Harold understood now why they were so desperate to get this notebook back. It was not just valuable intelligence. It was a death sentence for dozens of Soviet agents and their American accomplices. If the FBI got hold of this, it would be the biggest counterintelligence coup in years. He also understood that he and Martha were in mortal danger. The Soviets would not stop looking. They could not afford to. which meant Harold needed to get this notebook into the right hands immediately, before Mitchell or others like him found him. The next morning, Harold called Colonel Jennings. The old soldier answered on the third ring, his voice still carrying that parade ground authority even in retirement. "Colonel, this is Harold Brennan. I served under you in Korea, 2nd Platoon, Baker Company." "Brennan," the colonel said. "Good to hear from you, son." "What can I do for you?" Harold explained briefly and carefully what had happened. The colonel listened without interruption. When Harold finished, there was a long pause. "You are in over your head, soldier," Jennings finally said. "But you did the right thing calling me. I still have contacts at Defense Intelligence. Good men, men I trust with my life. Can you get to Baltimore?" "Yes, sir," Harold replied. "Meet me at Patterson Park at 1400 hours north entrance. Come alone, but bring the notebook. And Brennan, watch your six. If the Soviets are as determined as you say, they will be looking for you." Harold spent the next few hours watching the motel from various vantage points, making sure they had not been followed or found. Then, leaving Martha with strict instructions to stay in the room and not answer the door for anyone, he drove to Baltimore. Patterson Park was a large urban park on the east side of the city. Harold arrived early, parking several blocks away and walking through the neighborhood to make sure he was not being tailed. The park was busy with lunchtime joggers and mothers with strollers. Harold found a bench near the north entrance and waited. At precisely 2 o'clock, Colonel Jennings appeared. He looked older than Harold remembered, his hair completely white now, his gait showing the stiffness of age and old injuries. But his eyes were still sharp, still assessing everything with a soldier's awareness. He sat down beside Harold without preamble. "You have it?" he asked quietly. Harold nodded and passed him a folded newspaper with the notebook hidden inside. Jennings took it without looking down, tucking it under his arm. "Good," the colonel said. "I am meeting my contact in an hour. He works for Defense Intelligence, specializes in Soviet counterintelligence. If this notebook is what you say it is, it will go straight to the right people. But I need you to tell me everything again, every detail you remember about the party, about Fisher, about the man at the storage unit." For the next 30 minutes, Harold recounted the entire story, while Jennings listened and occasionally asked sharp questions. When Harold finished, the colonel nodded slowly. "Fisher was real," he said. "I made some calls after you contacted me. Raymond Fisher was a Soviet physicist who defected in late 1960. He was under CIA protection, living under a cover identity. But 3 days ago, he disappeared. Him, his wife, and his son. The agency thinks the Soviets grabbed them, but there is no evidence, no witnesses, no sign of a struggle. They just vanished." Harold felt a chill run through him. So they got him. The Soviets found him. "Maybe," Jennings said. "Or maybe the agency relocated him when they realized his cover was blown. Either way, you cannot help him now. But you can help your country by making sure this notebook gets to people who can use it properly. What you have done, Brennan, what you have risked, it matters. You may have helped break up one of the most extensive Soviet spy rings ever discovered on American soil." The colonel stood, still holding the newspaper. "Stay at that motel for 3 more days, he instructed. "Do not go home. Do not contact anyone. After 3 days, if you have not heard from me, it means we have taken action and it is safe for you to return to your normal life. If you do hear from me before then, follow my instructions exactly." "Understood?" "Yes, sir," Harold replied. Jennings started to walk away, then turned back. "One more thing, Brennan. That man at the storage unit, Tom Mitchell. That was not his real name. My contact says there is a Soviet agent operating in the area under various aliases, known for recruitment and wet work. Chances are that was him. Which means you are lucky to be alive. He could have killed you, but he wanted the notebook more than he wanted you dead. Now that the notebook is out of your hands, you are less valuable but also less threatening. Still, watch yourself. These people do not forget." The colonel disappeared into the park, and Harold sat for a few more minutes, letting the reality of the situation sink in. He had done it. He had gotten the notebook to someone who could help. Now all he could do was wait and hope that it was enough. The next 3 days were the longest of Harold's life. He and Martha stayed in the motel room, ordering food delivery and watching television to pass the time. Martha was terrified, but also, Harold noticed, oddly proud. She had always known her husband was brave. He had proven it in Korea. But this was different. This was courage of a quieter kind, the courage to do the right thing even when it meant putting himself and his family in danger. On the evening of the third day, Colonel Jennings called the motel room. "It is done," was all he said. "You can go home, and Brennan, thank you for your service." Again. Harold and Martha returned to their apartment the next morning. Nothing seemed disturbed. Life, improbably, appeared to be returning to normal. Harold went back to his storage unit, which had been cleaned out but remained his. He replaced his equipment and resumed performing at birthday parties. It was not until 2 weeks later that Harold saw the newspaper article. It was a small story, buried on page 6 of the Washington Post. A headline read, "Federal Agents Arrest 23 in Espionage Ring." The article described how FBI and Defense Intelligence agents had simultaneously raided locations throughout the Washington area, arresting American citizens and foreign nationals suspected of spying for the Soviet Union. The ring had been operating for at least 5 years, the article said, passing classified information about American military technology and nuclear research to handlers in the Soviet embassy. The article did not mention a notebook. It did not mention Dr. Fisher or a children's party clown. It simply stated that the breakthrough had come from a confidential intelligence source whose identity would remain protected. Harold read the article 3 times, then carefully folded the newspaper and put it in a drawer. He never told anyone else about what had happened, not even Martha's parents or his closest friends. It became a secret he and Martha shared, a strange interlude in their otherwise ordinary lives. Years later, after the Cold War had ended and the Soviet Union had collapsed, Harold sometimes wondered what had happened to Dr. Fisher and his family. Had they been recaptured by the Soviets, or had the CIA successfully relocated them? He would never know. Some questions, he came to understand, have no answers. But he did know one thing. On a Thursday afternoon in March of 1962, a children's party clown had accidentally uncovered a Soviet spy ring, not through any training or special skill, but simply by being in the wrong place at the wrong time and having the courage to do what was right when it mattered most. Harold continued working as Pickles the party clown until he retired in 1978. He performed at thousands of birthday parties, made tens of thousands of balloon animals, and brought laughter to countless children. And if sometimes while reaching into his prop bag, he remembered that one party where he found something that changed everything, he kept that memory to himself. The children did not need to know that the silly man in the polka-dot bow tie had once held the secrets of nations in his hands. The black sedan with the 2 men in suits never reappeared. Tom Mitchell, or whatever his real name was, vanished. The Soviet spy ring was dismantled, its members prosecuted or deported, and Harold Brennan went back to being just a clown, entertaining children and making them smile. It was, he reflected, exactly the life he had wanted after Korea. A life where the only thing that mattered was the sound of a child's laughter. Some heroes wear uniforms and medals. Others wear oversized shoes and polka-dot bow ties. Harold understood that both kinds of courage mattered. The courage to fight in war and the courage to protect peace when it came disguised as an ordinary day. He had shown both, and that knowledge sustained him through the rest of his years. Martha lived to see the Berlin Wall fall in 1989. She died peacefully in 1992, holding Harold's hand and remembering with him that strange week when their quiet life had intersected with history. Harold followed her 5 years later, taking the full story of that March day to his grave. Only Colonel Jennings knew the complete truth, and he had passed away in the mid-70s. The notebook that Harold had carried in his trunk, that had held the secrets of a Soviet spy ring, eventually made its way to the National Security Agency's archives. It sits there still, classified, one of thousands of documents from the Cold War era that may never be fully declassified. The names of the agents it exposed, the operations it detailed, the lives it saved by its exposure, all of that remains buried in government files. But the impact was real. 23 arrests, dozens more Soviet agents who fled the country before they could be captured, a significant degradation of Soviet intelligence capabilities in the American capital, All because a children's party clown reached into his prop bag and found something that did not belong there. The story has a final twist, one that Harold never knew. In 1994, 2 years before his death, a letter arrived at his apartment. It was postmarked from Prague, with no return address. Inside was a single photograph showing 3 people, a man, a woman, and a young man in his 30s. The man was older, grayer, but recognizably Dr. Raymond Fisher. The young man was clearly his son, now grown. On the back of the photograph, in careful handwriting, were 4 words. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." The letter fell behind Harold's dresser and was not discovered until after his death, when his niece was cleaning out his apartment. She looked at the photograph, puzzled, having no idea who these people were or why they would be thanking her uncle. Eventually, she threw it away, and the last physical connection between Harold Brennan and Raymond Fisher was lost. But in a cafe in Prague, or perhaps Vienna or Stockholm, Dr. Fisher sometimes told his son about the American clown who had saved their lives. How a simple entertainer had shown more courage than many trained agents, how he had risked everything to do what was right. Fisher's son, who had been 9 years old at that birthday party, barely remembered the clown who had made balloon animals and juggled pins. But he remembered his father's respect when he spoke of the man, remembered the lesson that heroes could come from anywhere, be anyone. The Cold War was full of grand operations and famous spies, of men like Kim Philby and Aldrich Ames, whose betrayals shaped history. But it was also full of small moments of courage by ordinary people who found themselves thrust into extraordinary circumstances. People like Harold Eugene Brennan, who wanted nothing more than to make children laugh, but who, when called upon, showed that the values he had fought for in Korea were worth defending at home as well. On March 14, 1962, a children's party clown went to perform at a birthday party in Arlington, Virginia. He left that party with a Soviet codebook in his prop bag and a choice to make. He could have ignored it, thrown it away, pretended he had never found it. Instead, he chose to act, to risk his own safety and that of his wife for the greater good. In doing so, Harold Brennan became part of the hidden history of the Cold War, one of countless unknown soldiers who fought not with weapons but with courage and integrity. His storage unit, number 42, remained rented in his name until his death. After the estate was settled, his niece sold off the clown equipment to a young performer just starting out. The juggling pins, the balloon pump, the prop bag, all of it went to someone new. The equipment had no memory of what it had carried, no trace of the secrets it had briefly held. It was just the tools of a trade, innocent and ordinary. But somewhere in the archives of American intelligence, a small leather-bound notebook with Russian text remains, marked as evidence in Case File 7739. Few people know it exists. Even fewer know the story of how it was obtained. And only a handful of individuals, most now dead, know the full truth of what happened that March when a children's party clown accidentally uncovered a Soviet spy ring and helped protect his country in the process. It is a story of the Cold War's hidden front, where battles were fought in suburban backyards and storage units rather than on distant battlefields, where heroes wore makeup and oversized shoes instead of uniforms and medals, where victory came not from military might, but from the simple courage of ordinary people who refused to look away when they stumbled upon something wrong. Harold would have been embarrassed by any suggestion that he was heroic. He always maintained, in the rare moments when he and Martha discussed those 3 days, that he had simply done what anyone would do. But Martha knew better. She had watched other people, good people, choose safety over risk, comfort over conscience. Harold had chosen differently. That was what made him special. That was what made him a hero. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories and check out the video on screen. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. See you next time.